small businesses with an automated virtual receptionist and mobility features to run business from anywhere. More at ooma.com. And Americans for the Arts.
This is 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:06. Time for KUOW's Week in Review.
What happened this week and what did it all mean? That's what we get to on the Week in Review. Welcome to it. I'm Bill Radke, and my super friends this week from Q13, reporter Jennifer Lee. Welcome back, Jennifer.
Thanks, Bill.
Nice to see you in your pumpkin sweater.
Yep, the pumpkin orange is alive today.
Knute Berger from Crosscut, editor at large there. Good to see you again, Knute.
Hey, Bill.
Flannel, as it should be. And Eli Sanders, formerly of The Stranger, creator of the Wild West newsletter. Welcome back, Pulitzer Prize winning Eli Sanders.
Nice to be here, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. That's what they sound like, and you can see what we look like at facebook.com/KUOW Public Radio. I just realized I was kind of dancing right before the show started, and that was probably caught visually, which I'm not proud of. But youtube.com/user/KUOW949, you can see us there. So take your pick. Okay, let's get into it. We did it. We made it through the final presidential debate last night. The candidates were asked what they would say on Inauguration Day to voters who didn't support them. President Trump took that in a different direction.
If he gets in, you will have a depression, the likes of which you've never seen. Your 401ks will go to hell, and it'll be a very, very sad day for this country.
What is on the ballot here is the character of this country: decency, honor, respect, treating people with dignity, making sure that everyone has an even chance. And I'm going to make sure you get that. You haven't been getting it the last 4 years.
There you have it. If the polls are accurate, Biden will win, and Inauguration Day will be a very, very sad day of decency, honor, and respect. By the way, that clip reminds me, when I can't see him, of how exactly Jim Carrey sounds like Joe Biden when he's on Saturday Night Live. What else? Before we talk Washington state elections, any presidential reactions from any of you?
Well, I just felt very relieved to have the final presidential debate over. I think a lot of people are just glad to have that one behind us. And listening to that clip of how President Trump would spend his second inaugural address fighting his old enemies, that sounds actually like a moment of honesty. I'm surprised, though, that he didn't say he would use the address to talk about Clinton's emails.
Right. Yeah, that we didn't hear that. Have all, I was saying that probably I figured when I well, I guess this is the mayor this week and the county executive. Maybe you would expect them to have voted, but I feel like because turnout is so high that everybody has voted already here on October 23rd. What about you all?
I have not voted yet, and this is actually going to be my first time mail-in voting, which I'm actually pretty excited about. I already know which ballot box I'm going to go to. I live in West Seattle, and the closest one is the Junction. I know there was some controversy over that ballot box the weekend prior, but all is good. I've been by there. We interviewed people. So
what was the controversy?
So someone had smeared something on cardboard and tried to shove it down the slot, if you heard.
I did not. And do I want to? Is that as much?
What do you guys think? Have you guys? No.
It was poo.
Great.
There you go.
By the way, speaking of drop boxes, Jennifer, and first of all, I'll come over to your house and take that ballot from you if you need me to take it to a drop box, which I discovered from you this week was likely designed in Pierce County in Puyallup.
Yes, it was. The company itself is called Laser Fab, and they call their ballot box line Vote Armor. They have 3 different sizes, and if you live in King County, you're seeing the largest Vote Armor ballot box. And just to give you some specs on the boxes, they weigh over 1,000 pounds. Once they're actually brought to the site, they're cemented into the ground with 8-inch bolts. And this is information that I learned initially from the Director of Elections here, Julie Wise. And they're very proud of this product because so far it's been able to withstand a lot of different elements, rain. Some of them even have like a fire suppressant system inside. So they're using this to make sure people's votes are secure and safe, which has been a hot topic this election cycle.
Will they withstand the poo smears?
Apparently the ballots were all good, and the election workers are heroes for going out there as quickly as they did and for cleaning it up.
That is heroic.
I dropped my ballot at the Rainier Community Center Dropbox, all sparkling clean and very easy to use. And you just slide it in. It's like a kind of mail slot. You don't have to touch anything if you're concerned about COVID or, fall flu transmission. And again, just this great big feeling of relief. Okay, that's done. Finally, after 4 years, got to cast the vote that I had been waiting for.
Yeah, we cast our ballots. We voted the same day that they arrived in the mail. I've been in communication with my mail carrier, who assured me that things here were working smoothly and would work smoothly. So we actually put ours in the mail and followed up and found our ballots were in and counted. So relieved. And like Eli, yeah, it's you wonder with these debates, I mean, who's undecided at this point? I mean, not many people apparently, because so many early voting is going on all over the country. But I'll be honest, I made up my mind about Trump before he was elected the first time. So I'm not exactly open-minded on that topic.
Do you think all the early voting is going to affect elections in Washington state one way or the other? Anybody?
Well, I think it could. But I mean, part of it is not just the early voting, it's the percentage of early voting suggests a massive turnout, a very, very large turnout. And you're finding that in rural counties as well as urban counties. Because of the weight of population and where people live and the way they tend to vote, that would bode well, I think, for Democrats, who usually do better in large turnout elections. But it also shows, I think, people in areas outside the city are very, very motivated as well.
I think one of the big questions is how many people will vote all the way down the ballot. This is a, long, especially in King County, a long accordion folded ballot. You have to vote two sides of it. By the time you're done, you're all the way down to Superior Court judges, which are really important for those of us who are concerned about criminal justice reform and so on. But if a lot of the people who are leading to these high turnout figures for early voting are just here for the vote against Trump, which I think is a, likely vote in King County, then if they don't vote all the way down the ballot, I don't know what the effect will be. One of the races that I am really interested to see the outcome for, and I don't quite know how early voting and high turnout might or might not affect it, is the lieutenant governor race, which, because of Jay Inslee's potential maybe pick to be a Biden cabinet member should Biden win, could be a really consequential race. But again, it's a down ballot race, and I don't know how many of the early voters are paying close attention to that.
Knute Berger's paying close attention.
I pay close attention to the lieutenant governor's race.
You were watching that debate instead of the presidential.
I did watch that debate instead of the presidential debate. And, what's interesting to me about that is you have these two very qualified, politically fairly closely aligned Democrats. So that's weird. I mean, the fact that the choice is between two Democrats. But they're basically running for a job that should be abolished. The current lieutenant governor left the state. He lives in California and is studying to become a Jesuit.
And no one really noticed.
And no one noticed, exactly. So you wonder why these two people, I mean, Mark Elias and Denny Heck, want this job. Now, Heck said something interesting in the debate. He said, well, he thought about economizing government, and he noted that the lieutenant governor's budget has leapt up in the last biennium, almost doubled. Why is that? When it's an office that has a few important responsibilities, but they're part-time, and is largely just kind of a sinecure for whoever happens to be in that office.
One of the questions, though, I guess the answer maybe to Knute's question, why would anyone want this job? The answer this year is that you might well become governor shortly after Election Day. And so I've read that Denny Heck, the former member of Congress, former elected official, longtime elected official in Washington State, who retired from Congress recently because he just didn't like the rancor, I think. He said that if he is elevated to the governorship because Inslee takes a cabinet post in a future Biden administration, he will not run for a sort of full-time governor gig. The way it would work here in Washington State is that if Inslee moves on to the Biden administration, the lieutenant governor becomes governor until the next November election, at which point we'll all vote on a new governor. So Heck is saying, I think categorically and very clearly, I will not run for governor. Now, I don't know how much I believe that, because when he resigned from Congress, he said, I'm never running for office again. And here he is running for lieutenant governor. Marco Lias, if I read correctly, has a statement about running for governor that leaves the impression that he wouldn't run. He would just take the appointment and then step aside, but leaves a rhetorical loophole for walking through and actually running for governor.
He said he wouldn't run last night, but loopholes for politicians are different than loopholes for the rest of us.
Jennifer, whether it's lieutenant governor or any other local races, any other reaction before we roll on?
I think I'm just fascinated and excited to see the voting process and experience it, especially during a presidential election year in Washington State. And I do think it's a system that people should be very proud of. And it's also really inspiring to see people getting out and voting early, whether it's because you were very concerned or because you felt like it was your duty this time around.
Right. So talking of campaigns, Eli, our state attorney general is about to sue Google again over political ads. Briefly, what's that about?
This is about Washington State having some of the strongest regulations in the nation when it comes to transparency in online political ads. Everyone's familiar with the Russian effort in 2016 to disrupt the US election. Part of that effort, one part, was buying political ads on Facebook and other platforms in rubles. That suggested to a lot of people that the kind of Wild West, so to speak, of tech platforms needed to be better regulated. But in the Trump administration, throughout 4 years of the Trump administration, nothing has been done to increase the required daylight for the financing and reach and look of online political ads. It just so happens that here in Washington State, we had a law already on the books that can be used to force tech platforms, so that's Google, Facebook, Twitter, when it was selling political ads, to disclose the money behind the political ads, who exactly is paying for them, what they looked like, and information about who they were targeted at. Because the major thing about online political ads is they can be narrowly targeted so that a few people who the campaigns want to reach see them, but the rest of us don't. And so Google, rather than comply with these ads, said in 2018, well, we're just going to ban all political ads on our platform that are aimed at Washington State's elections. The problem was it kept on selling them, and it kept on failing to make the required disclosures about them. That is why Attorney General Ferguson, for the second time in 2+ years, is suing Google for violating this state law.
And these are not just ads you would see in a Google search at the top. These are all kinds of ads that you see, right?
That's right. Some of them are ads that you would see in a Google search. Some of them are, placement for the candidate's website. If you're searching for their name, they might pop up, or their opponent's name, their website might pop up. And some of them are display ads that might appear all around the web through Google's platform. And the point is that the public should be able to know who's paying for these ads, what they looked like, and who they reached. It's just like I have the right now, and any citizen, any resident of Washington State has the right now to walk into KUOW and say, hey, can I see the political ad books, or King 5 TV, or the Seattle Times, or the Stranger,
Or Q13.
or Q13,
Crosscut. Yeah.
or Crosscut if they weren't a nonprofit that doesn't sell
God.
political ads, I don't think. So anyway, people have long had this right. You have the right actually in federal elections under federal law when it comes to TV stations to look at ad books for national ads. But the law federally has not kept up when it comes to digital platforms. In Washington, it has kept up when it comes to digital platforms, but the digital platforms are not complying. So right now, in addition to the action that's coming against Google, the Attorney General is already suing Facebook, and the case of Washington State versus Facebook has been rolling along since the summer in King County Superior Court. That's part of what I'm covering with my newsletter, Wild West.
Hey, Eli, does the state law have any monetary penalties that go with this?
Yes, and so that's really—
People can well afford to pay over and over?
Right. Well, so I recently interviewed Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who is on the Judiciary Subcommittee in the House that recently released this antitrust report, this big report on Google, Amazon, Apple, and Facebook being monopolistic in their practices. And one of the things, Bill, the report says is that we have this problem of recidivism. Usually when, the powers that be are talking about recidivism, they're talking about people who are bad actors in the community, right? That Trump would probably talk about that. But this is America's largest tech platforms being recidivists in the sense that they break the law over and over again because, like Bill said, they can afford to pay any fine. So what's happened here in Washington is Attorney General Ferguson already sued Google and Facebook in 2018 for this very issue. They paid a fine of $200,000 each. And they went right on, according to Ferguson and the Washington State Public Disclosure Commission, breaking the law again. And so this time, rather than accept a settlement, my guess is that Ferguson is going to force both Facebook and Google to go through the lawsuit process, admit guilt if they want to settle, which they weren't required to do last time, and pay, I would imagine, a much larger fine than $200,000, something that actually, as you point out, Bill, makes a dent for one of these massive, very wealthy companies.
Any other reaction or questions before we move on to an oxymoron?
I think that's
Yes,
so
Jen.
fascinating, Eli, and can't wait to hear the updates that come out of it.
That oxymoron would be anarchy jurisdiction, and that's coming up on the program. And what's the future of downtown Seattle, Bellevue? Is it ghost town? Is it, hey, more affordable again? We'll talk telecommuting and other stuff when we return on Week in Review with Jennifer Lee and Knute Berger and Eli Sanders. Don't go away.
The program will continue in a minute on 94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station.
The Daily is a news show that tells a story from the beginning, and it does it with sound and nuance, and it utilizes the extraordinary news operation of the New York Times. Almost 1,500 reporters who break the biggest stories in the world, and we do it 5 days a week. I'm Michael Barbaro, and this is The Daily. This afternoon at 2 on KUOW 94.9 and KUOW.org.
Support for KUOW comes from King Conservation District, helping to empower residents to build a more climate-resilient King County by working with individuals and forested communities through their Wildfire Resiliency Program. More at kingcd.org/wildfire. Helping build better ground.
48 degrees in Seattle. The forecast has rain in it for today, but then mostly sunny days for the next few days. It's 12:26. We return to KUOW's Week in Review.
Crosscut's Knute Berger, Q13's Jennifer Lee, and Eli Sanders of the Wild West newsletter are grouped on my computer screen. You can see us at Facebook, or you can watch us at YouTube. YouTube.com/user/KUOW949. As you wish, we are recapping the week for you. And this week, Seattle and Portland and New York sued the U.S. Justice Department to get them to quit designating these cities as jurisdictions of anarchy. Remember, President Trump said these cities had allowed anarchy, violence, and destruction during the George Floyd protests, and Trump threatened to withhold federal grants from the cities. Seattle's mayor, Jenny Durkan, told me on the air that she was hoping Trump wouldn't actually follow through on that threat.
But unfortunately now we've gotten some clear indications that actual federal funding that the city has and needs or would have access to would be denied on the basis of this finding by the president. You know, it really is in many ways an enemies list. We think it's patently unconstitutional for a whole range of reasons. This is not a performative lawsuit. For example, I'll tell you that we learned recently that as we apply for transit dollars for both sound transit funding and hopefully for transportation dollars for the West Seattle Bridge, that some of the departments who would be giving out the grants of those have interpreted this statement by the Department of Justice and the president as preventing us from even applying. Obviously, that would be critical to the city of Seattle. You know, it would go so far as asking us to repay CARES Act money that has actually gone already to help people have food stability or rent stability or small businesses get loans. And so there's a lot at stake for the people of Seattle.
That's Mayor Jenny Durkan there, not taking a Joe Biden election victory for granted. Knute, you don't assume Trump is bluffing either?
Oh, I don't think he's bluffing. I mean, as Mayor Durkan pointed out, this is actually working its way through the as a command from the top. I think she's absolutely right that it's like an enemies list. He's identified cities that have openly disagreed with him about all kinds of issues. It was the previous mayor who declared Seattle a bastion of the resistance to Trump. So there's been a difficult relationship, but it's managed to continue. Seattle is extremely reliant on federal funds. I think in the press release that was put out related to the lawsuit by the city, the current budget, it's $236 million of federal funds, much of that for the social safety net. A bunch of it is for COVID related mitigation and dealing with the pandemic. So it's a lot of money, and that's on top of the kind of money that you would need to replace the West Seattle Bridge or something like that. Seattle used to have friends in the Senate and the White House and was able, for example, when the old West Seattle Bridge got run into by a ship and broken and had to be completely replaced with the one that's now broken, Warren G. Magnuson, our US Senator, was able basically to write a check. He was on the Appropriations Committee. So that's not true anymore generally, but it certainly would not be true under 4 more years of Trump. It would be much worse.
I also think when you have national conversations about a city like Seattle, from an outsider's perspective, I don't know about you guys, but when CHOP was around, there were a lot of people from out of state asking people in Seattle, are you okay? Because they just thought the entire city was taken over. But CHOP was 3 to 4 blocks in size in one specific neighborhood. So I think when you have a conversation painting a picture of Seattle in such a way, it does give a very false image of what the city is and who the people are too.
Another sign of how political this action is, how this is just really pure politics by President Trump and the Justice Department, which I believe approved this, I don't know what you call it, a citation of Washington or Seattle as an anarchist jurisdiction. So Seattle, I think Portland's on the list, New York City is on the list, but there are other places that have had really intense protests, in support of racial justice this summer, including Kenosha, Wisconsin, Minneapolis, Minnesota. What's different about those cities than Seattle and Portland? Oh, they're in states that are major swing states in the upcoming presidential election, and maybe the Republican-led Justice Department and President Trump don't want to upset people in those states just now.
Although the President Trump and the Justice Department's designation, if you will, of the anarchy jurisdiction has to do with Seattle's reaction to those protests. And Jennifer mentioned the CHOP, the Capitol Hill Organized Protest or Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. There is a lawsuit going through the federal court system now brought by some Capitol Hill businesses who are suing the city of Seattle for essentially the same reasons, that the city, gave barricades to the protesters and medical tents and backed away. And there were deaths there and property damage, and some businesses couldn't operate. And a federal judge just said that there's enough to the lawsuit, at least, that it can continue to proceed. Isn't that a different case from what happened in Kenosha, et cetera?
Well, I guess I would say that in an anarchist jurisdiction, you have no recourse to the law to begin with. So the fact that these business owners can file suit to try to get some, monetary recompense for their lost business during these protests is proof that we are not living in an anarchist jurisdiction where you would have no court of law to file your suit in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really feel for the property owners, the people who lived in that area during that time, because really they were just there and, people assembled and it was violent. And I mean, during the pandemic, I think business owners continue to struggle. And, I've heard from other business owners who are better off saying they just need to get through this time period, but not everyone is going to be able to do that.
I want to say I agree with Jennifer about the outside image of Seattle. I was over in Eastern Washington on a work trip recently, and it used to be when you would talk to people over there, they would say, "Oh, you're from Seattle? Oh, yeah, my daughter lives in Seattle, works for Microsoft, and we had a great time. Saw the Seahawks, went up the Space Needle." Now they kind of look at you with horror, when you say you're from Seattle. And they're like, it's a hellhole. I think the sort of Fox imagery and the kind of thing that Trump has promulgated is given a false image. That said, I think that the complaints of the property owners and business owners on Capitol Hill in relation to how the city responded, court is exactly where that ought to be. It's not some, guy like the president writing off a city because he doesn't like its politics. But there are legitimate complaints on both sides about the way things were handled. And going to court and having that argument in a civil court, I think is totally appropriate.
Eli, speaking of critics of Seattle, what did you think of the Seattle LGBTQ Commission this week calling on Mayor Durkan to resign, adding its voice to the Human Rights Commission and to some city council members?
Well, they say 3 is a trend in journalism. So you've got the LGBTQ Commission and the Human Rights Commission, as you said, and then some council members. And I think that begins to stack up to, a difficult, I guess you might call it a difficult hurdle for Durkan in her re-election effort, and a really easy talking point for any challenger to Durkan. I am not sure how much clout these commissions carry. I know that they have very important jobs, and it's great that we have these commissions, but I don't know how well known or influential they are among the average voter in Seattle. I just don't know.
Any other reaction to city being criticized from all fronts before we move on?
Well,
Yes, Jennifer.
I'm going to say in short that, it just continues to show the divided city hall that we have in Seattle currently. And I think it's just going to continue to divide out as we move forward.
I just remind people that next year there'll be a mayoral election in 2021. So it's coming right up. And I think this next year, if you don't like the job Jenny Durkin's done, and assuming if she runs for re-election, you'll have a chance to vote. You'll have a chance to have your say about who should be sitting in City Hall. So, your opportunity is coming up.
So President Trump thinks Seattle is a hellhole of anarchy. Other people are worried downtown is going to be empty. Amazon just announced its corporate employees can work from home through June. That's about 55,000 office workers in downtown Seattle and Bellevue. Where do you think that leaves downtown businesses that grew up around companies like Amazon and others, big corporations, these little businesses that sell groceries and childcare and apartments and everything else?
It is drastically different if you go down by South Lake Union. I mean, there are still people who live in those high rises that live in downtown, but it is nothing in comparison to what it was like when the full workforce was there. I know that for Amazon employees, there are a lot of families who feel thankful that, they continue to be able to work from home. And
you've spoken to some of them.
I'm sorry?
I say you've spoken to some of them. You've reported on them.
Yeah. I know that, there are families who are thankful that they get to be at home, families that have children, with both parents who have jobs and work from home, and they feel thankful to be able to have this time together. But the downtown businesses, a lot of them strategically place themselves down there to get the Amazon business. And I don't think we're going to see a lot of them survive this.
It's interesting, the class divide that's become apparent with the different levels of Amazon workers. The downtown employees who had, very nice office towers to work in are now free to work from home and, are essentially knowledge economy workers and have flexibility. They could work from a different state if they want to, go to Wyoming and have a nice view, but some higher COVID levels. And the workers in Amazon's warehouses south of Seattle, they do need to keep on working. And I think, from the reporting I've read, some of them are actually quite happy to still be working given the current economy, and the businesses around them, as Jennifer talked about in the context of South Lake Union, the businesses around the Amazon distribution centers or warehouses south of Seattle, they're really happy to have people coming in for lunch still, and so on. The workers, however, have some concerns about their conditions. And one of the really interesting recent demands from Amazon warehouse workers is give us election day off so that we can vote, or we're going to walk out. And I think that's something to watch in the next, 12 days or something until the election, whether Amazon says, we're going to be a good corporate citizen in the way that our employees are asking us to be, and make election day a day off so our employees can get out of the warehouse for a second and vote.
Does early voting and mail-in voting not affect that position?
That is a very good question. But I think that this is a nationwide campaign. And so while good point, it may be less of an effort or less of a important issue in Washington state, there are tons of other states where the government doesn't make it as easy to vote by mail.
What do you think, Knute?
I'll make a couple of points. One, I did a story before the pandemic about how downtown is always being claimed to be dying or needs saving. And I went back through and, since the 1950s, there have been all these movements to remake downtown, revitalize downtown, save downtown. That argument was used to tear down the Pike Place Market. We needed to get rid of blight to save downtown. It was Westlake Park was supposed to save downtown. The convention center was supposed to save downtown. There have been all of these efforts constantly to keep that business district a certain way. And the two most recent incarnations have been tourists and conventioners, and that worked really well for what it was, and Amazon and South Lake Union. And when both of those were humming, as they were on by mid-February of this year. We looked unstoppable, and then bang. I think they're in crisis, a genuine crisis, probably the worst since the Great Depression, in terms of how downtown can be put back together in a way that's more sustainable. That could create opportunity for affordability, which people have been pushed out. Many people have been pushed out of central Seattle. But then it's also cut against by the fact that Microsoft and other companies are learning that their employees are basically just as productive at home as they are in the office. And then you begin to think, well, who needs a headquarters? We saw that with REI. They built a big new headquarters and then sold it to Google, I think.
Starbucks just kind of shut down its headquarters and to rejigger it, and it'll just be a place where there are offices that you can, get on your computer. And
exactly. And so those sort of offices that become work share spaces, they become like those hubs where people can drop in and drop out of. And Starbucks said they weren't coming back for at least a year. So I think downtown, they're really going to have to do some creative thinking, even though the impulse will be, how do we get the cruise ships back? How do we get the convention center beefed up? I think they're going to have to think of a new creative iteration that we isn't totally clear right now.
I totally agree with what Knute's saying, because just in speaking again with people who don't live or often go to downtown Seattle, I've heard it described as scary, and that, they would think twice before going there now. So definitely agree with what Knute's added there.
I've heard ghost town from.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that phrase. I have heard that phrase. Go on, Eli.
Well, I actually, I'm part of the problem to the extent that it's a problem. I haven't been to downtown in months. I just haven't needed to, and I've been trying to, observe all kinds of COVID precautions. So I'm part of making it a ghost town. But when I hear from people who, happen to go through it, they are kind of surprised, I guess, maybe a little shaken, but surprised, and they describe it over and over again as a ghost town.
But so ghost town, won't rent. I'm no Joseph Stiglitz here. I'm no Richard Florida. I'm no urbanist. But don't rents just drop until there's more renting, or is there something about the buildup that's made it that these are businesses and offices and residences that just won't be filled at any price? It's going to be all boarded up. I really don't know how that goes.
I haven't checked prices in quite a while, but there have been a lot of business owners who've moved out of downtown specifically because of, just the property, whether it's renting or taxes, whatever they say, they've moved out of there, and they're not seeing the same type of income coming in with the way the economy is right now.
Definitely a lower income, but do rents not drop to a point where they're filled with different tenants, or just people paying less?
Well, one would think they're going to have to
101 class on the University of Washington Great Hall. I'm sitting on the Union campus looking at a chart, a very neat looking chart.
Yeah, one would think. I suppose it depends on what the lenders will allow these various developments they've underwritten. Sort of betting on this this sort of economic boom. There was interesting data out this week in the Seattle Times about the fact that basically a fifth of the jobs in Seattle, more than any other city of equivalent size, are STEM jobs, and that's really amazing. And of course, the top category in there is software, people who write software, and second is engineers. And this also suggests to me that those folks are going to increase, and where they choose to live may broaden. So you not only have people not wanting to come downtown, but it might be more viable for people to look at a broader geographic area in order to do their work away from home. So yeah, something's going to have to happen on all those rents and all that commercial space.
It'll also be interesting quickly to see how this plays into the ongoing and forever clash about what downtown should be. Should we have more bike lanes? Can we afford that, given the so-called war on cars, or whatever people have updated that phrase to now? Can we have more parks downtown? Who knows what downtown will be on the other side of the pandemic, but perhaps there is an opportunity for making it a more livable, breathable, bikeable, shareable space.
We'll see. Feel free to email me to tell me that Rate Hall never actually had an Econ 101 class in 1983. I might have been slightly off on that. This is the Week in Review. I'm Husky Bill Radke with Jennifer Lee of Q13 and Eli Sanders of the Wild West newsletter, Knute Berger from Crosscut. And you can watch us do our thing at Facebook or at YouTube. We're going to come right back and begin to wrap up the Week in Review. And by the way, we're going to talk a couple of health crises, one of which we hear about constantly, and one maybe we should be. And we'll also even talk about something that makes us smile when we return.
94.9 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station.
Hi, this is Ari Shapiro, host of All Things Considered. When I'm hosting the show, I'm always listening for the thing that's sticky, the thing that jumps out of the radio and grabs you, the thing that'll make you go home to your spouse or your kid or your friend and say, hey, you'll never believe what I heard today. All Things Considered. Listen every afternoon.
I'm Kim Malcolm with local news and smart conversations from Seattle and Western Washington, starting at 3 on KUOW 94.9 and KUOW.org.
Support for KUOW comes from neighborhood Fred Meyer stores, providing fresh food and the ability to personalize shopping on the Fred Meyer app or in store. Fred Meyer, fresh for everyone.
It is 12 minutes till 1 o'clock, and we return to KUOW's Week in Review.
COVID cases have been rising in Washington since mid-September. In King County, Public Health Officer Jeff Duchin says we have about 140, 150 cases a day, which is about twice as many as a month ago.
It started with the smoke event and the turn in the weather that we think brought a lot of people indoors. And we know that in the wintertime and the bad weather, more people do come indoors, which gives the virus a lot more opportunity to transmit from person to person. I think of it as the virus now has home field advantage. We had home field advantage for the first bit. Now the virus has home field advantage, and we need to step up our game.
The virus has home field advantage. That is a disturbing metaphor. The virus is the home team and humans are just the visitors or something. Jennifer, what are we doing what's something we're doing to fight a virus that has an advantage?
Yeah, I just checked back in with the Tacoma Pierce County Health Department's case and contact investigation team, and they've grown over the last few months, and they now have over 40 case investigators. And they've actually interviewed several people who have also gone through introductory training. I thought this was interesting. So they have a reserve team that they'd be able to fully train up and be ready to go on the chance they need a larger team to take on the case investigations. So that, is still one of the best ways for us to contain the coronavirus is to test and identify and then contact trace close contacts. So this was interesting because we actually talked about it over the summer while you're off, Bill. One of the questions that was brought up was, what if the person doesn't answer the phone? And I was really curious about that. And I went back and I asked them, and actually they're mandated to contact the individual 4 times. So that's 3 phone calls, a text message. And if they still don't hear back from this person, whether it's a positive COVID test or close contact, then they end up receiving a letter in the mail. So, they're hard.
If you're signed up, can't you give your phone location and they just come and find me?
Hey! GPS.
Yeah, right. No privacy concerns there. Okay, well, Jennifer, meanwhile, you've been reporting on a health crisis that we would be hearing more about if it weren't for COVID.
Yeah, for sure. Just this week, one of our colleagues, Omar Lewis, reported that King County Public Health is reporting 135 fentanyl overdoses and that it's disproportionately affecting young people. And that's last year in total, there were 116 fentanyl overdoses, and this is 135 this year to date. And we still have 2 more months to go. These are pills that are laced with fentanyl. They look like real pain medication, and dealers are selling them on the street. So this is something that authorities are trying to tackle. The DEA has just started a new task force to try and find these drugs that are apparently being brought in from drug cartels from Mexico. So they're very large operations. They're very terrifying. And I just interviewed a local family, parents in Bellevue, who lost a 20-year-old son. His name was Bobby Osbin, and he would have been 21 years old in December. And they say that he grew an addiction to pain medication after getting his wisdom tooth removed last year. So, this is something that a lot of young people are being impacted by. And I think it's a scary process. Obviously, it's a heartbreaking loss when you lose a loved one, but I think the steps leading up to that point are just such a struggle for families who, are trying to care for a loved one who is battling an addiction.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. I just want to make sure we're talking about the opiates and synthetics, at the same time. We can do this. We can talk about that at the same time we're talking about COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
It's really important reporting from Jennifer. And, one piece of this larger struggle that we're having as a society in America dealing with narcotic painkillers. I think it was this week, Purdue Pharma announced that it was going to pay something like $8 billion for its role in the opioid crisis. That in part, a lot of the stories in the opioid crisis are similar to the one that Jennifer just recounted. Someone goes in for a normal medical procedure, wisdom teeth out, or, something more involved, and they're prescribed opioid pain medication and then have big trouble getting off of it. Now, there's been a huge movement in the medical community in this country in recent years to really dial back the number of opioid pain medication prescriptions to try to stem the resulting crisis of addiction. But it's a really hard problem to solve. People want pain medication. When it doesn't work, they want something stronger. And when they get addicted, it is a very difficult thing to get someone out of just by saying, we're not going to fill your prescription anymore at the doctor's office, because then, as Jennifer has reported, people turn to what's available on the street and can sometimes, unfortunately, end up buying painkillers that, as Jennifer has shown, are laced with fentanyl.
Knute, I do, believe it or not, want to talk about things making us smile. Do you have anything first to add about either our fentanyl situation or where we are in the COVID curve this week?
Well, this has been very interesting about the fentanyl, because that's a topic I don't know a lot about. So I feel like I've learned something today from my fellow guests. As far as COVID goes, I think the frustrating thing for a lot of people across the political spectrum is an answer as to when it's going to be over. And I think that one reason you're seeing increases in cases is people's frustration with social distancing or lockdown or masks or whatever. I think all of us feel some sense of frustration that we want to be able to resume life as normal. And the fact that there's, we're uncertain as to whether and when a vaccine is going to show up and whether it will be effective. And so I think that element of insecurity, uncertainty, and frustration is going to take a toll, even more of a toll, as time goes on.
Next week, I'll be telling you, I'm going to be interviewing a University of Washington epidemiologist about how to form a pandemic pod, a bubble of people that you live separately, but you've agreed with these people to be careful outside your pod. And then whether it's you're doing joint childcare or just hanging out or whatever it is, maybe without a mask, maybe with a mask. So that might make some people smile next week.
Yeah, that'll be welcome guidance.
Yes. And that's where I want to end it. I try to end on something smile worthy. Last week, in the same time of the show, at the end, I was saying, well, I'm happy that Issaquah's Hillside Cemetery is hosting a Halloween graveyard tour. and I described it, and the panelists were horrified. Like, how could I be so morbid that here we have Halloween, an ancient remembrance of the dead, and I had to go make it about death. Sorry, I apologize for ruining the Mexican festival of Dia de los Mounds bars. But if you prefer your Halloween events more lively and less dead, then how about this one? City Fruit donates locally harvested fruit to people in need. And this Sunday, Ken Jennings, the all-time champ and probably future host of Jeopardy, will host a fruit-themed trivia contest and cider tasting. Hard cider, hard questions. Ticket sales go until Saturday evening. The virtual party starts Sunday at 5. How's that for wholesome? Although after the trivia game, Ken Jennings will eat everyone's brains. So I'm just kind of, so you're forewarned. Anything making any of you smile?
I think we have to return to the fact that the election is almost here. How many of your friends, how many of your listeners, Bill, have been calling in for 4 years saying, we can't take it anymore. We wish election day was today. It is about to happen. That's really exciting.
Good point. I got a minute or so. Anybody else smiling?
I could pick up my ballot as like a prop. I would do it now too. I'm going to be voting this weekend, and I'm also very excited about that. So yeah, I'd echo what Eli just said, that, you know, if you haven't voted yet, get out there. There are so many easy ways, whether it's through mailing it in with USPS or going to a ballot box. Yeah.
And Knute, you have news of a border war.
Well, it's not like smiling like I'm enjoying it, but I am kind of amused. Mm-hmm. France and Italy are apparently in a hot fight over who the top of Mont Blanc belongs to. Mm-hmm. And apparently this has been simmering this is in the French and Italian Alps. Yes. It's the tallest of all the Alps. And they're having a dispute over who controls the top. The French want to regulate it so it doesn't get overrun with people. The Italians say, well, it's in our territory, you can't do that. They actually share it. But it's just this thing about humans. I mean, we'll fight over anything. Yes. You know, this is really just a dotted line on a map where hardly anybody ever goes. And yet it's, the war drums are pounding between Italy and France over this.
We have it here. The King County line runs across the Cascade Ridge, and I don't appreciate the Kittitas County incursions. We call it Mount Daniel. We know it's called Mount Hinman, okay? Back off, Kittitas County. That is the Week in Review. Our time is up. Q13's Jennifer Lee, the Wild West newsletters, Eli Sanders, Crosscut's editor-at-large, Knute Berger. Thank you, everyone. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you, Bill.
Thanks, guys.
The show is produced by Sarah Leibovitz, and we get a live stream online brought to you by Juan Pablo Chiquiza and Tio Popescu. I'm Bill Radke. Talk